Sometimes, the most interesting airplanes aren't found in museums. They're parked on the grass at a little hometown airport where people enjoy pancakes on a Sunday morning. I almost missed breakfast that day, but what I found instead was something even better. A beautifully restored 1943 Boeing-Stearman. An airplane that taught thousands of young pilots how to fly, survived a world war, escaped becoming a crop duster, and somehow still spends its weekends flying over the same countryside where it has for years. Most stories have another side. This one's just a little stranger. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. On that morning, I drove about 5 minutes from my house to the fly-in breakfast at Royalton Airport, a small airport that has quietly served the local aviation community for years. The breakfast had been going on for a while when I arrived, and everyone I spoke with told me I had missed an incredible meal. Judging by the empty tables, I believed them. But as I walked between the hangars towards the tarmac, breakfast instantly became the least interesting thing about my morning. Sitting right in front of me was a beautifully restored Stinson Reliant. Then, just a few parking spots away, another airplane that immediately caught my eye. A 1943 Boeing-Stearman, painted in a classic blue fuselage with bright yellow wings. It looked exactly the way a Stearman should. The funny part is, I already knew this airplane. Not because I met the owner before, but because I see it flying over my house fairly often. Living only a few miles from the airport, it's one of those familiar radial engine sounds that makes you stop what you're doing and look towards the sky. This time, though, I finally had a chance to see it up close. I spoke with Joe, the current owner, who shared something I wasn't expecting. The airframe is still completely original. It was never converted into a crop duster. That might not sound unusual, but after World War II, thousands of military surplus Stearmans were sold for just a few $100s. Most were stripped down, fitted with larger engines and chemical tanks, and went to work spraying crops over North America. Original training aircraft became surprisingly uncommon. Seeing one that escaped that fate makes airplanes like this a little more special. The story of the Stearman actually begins during the 1930s. Designed by Lloyd Stearman's company in Wichita before Boeing acquired the business in 1934, the Model 75 quickly became America's primary military trainer. More than 10,000 were eventually built. Depending on the engine and who operated it, it wore several different military designations. The Army knew it as the PT-13, the PT-17, and the PT-18. The Navy called it the N2S. The Canadians knew it as the Cadet. No matter what name appeared on the paperwork, the mission stayed exactly the same: teach someone how to fly. And it did that better than almost anything else. The Stearman wasn't fast. It wasn't glamorous, but it was incredibly strong. Its welded steel tube fuselage, fabric covering, and sturdy wooden wings made it almost unbelievably durable. One aviation writer joked that if you ever felt the urge to crash an airplane, the Stearman was probably the best one to choose because it would likely survive better than whatever you hit. Of course, surviving the airplane wasn't always the difficult part. Flying it on the ground could be. The large radial engine blocked nearly all of the pilot's forward view while taxiing. Instead of driving straight, pilots constantly weaved back and forth in wide S-turns just to see where they were going. Crosswinds could also introduce another famous Stearman tradition, the ground loop. There was an old saying among Stearman pilots: there are only two kinds of Stearman pilots, those who have ground looped one, and those who will. It was funny because it was usually true. Inside the cockpit, things were refreshingly simple. There wasn't even a conventional fuel gauge. The fuel tank sat in the upper wing, and the fuel level was checked by looking up at a clear sight tube. Sometimes the simplest solutions really do work. Despite its quirks, the Stearman produced an entire generation of military pilots. Roughly half of all American military pilots during World War II received their first flight instruction in one. Many of the Tuskegee Airmen began their flying careers in Stearmans. Even future President George H.W. Bush trained in a Navy N2S before going on to fly combat missions during the war. Not every Stearman story happened in the air. One of my favorites comes from Alfred Hitchcock's classic film North by Northwest. Most people assume the famous crop duster chasing Cary Grant across the cornfield is a Boeing-Stearman. It isn't. The airplane flying is actually a Naval Aircraft Factory N3N. But when it came time for a dramatic explosion at the end of the scene, Hollywood used a dummy Boeing-Stearman for the fiery crash. Even in the movies, the Stearman somehow ended up doing the hard work. As I walked around Joe's airplane on that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about how many lives airplanes like this have lived. Military trainer, surplus aircraft, crop duster, airshow performer, movie stunt double, and now, a beautifully preserved piece of history that still flies from a small local airport where families come for breakfast on a Sunday morning. Events like this remind me why I enjoy supporting small airports wherever I can. They're more than just runways. They're places where aviation history quietly continues, often just a few miles from home. And sometimes, all it takes is missing breakfast to discover another story worth telling. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.